Good evening. Thank you everybody for coming tonight. We have an informational meeting for you, some cool videos to show you, and I want to get started right away because I know people are busy. I just want to reassure the public that the government is planning and we're ready in case there's a flood. I hope we don't have one. We aren't out of the woods yet, and you'll hear about that as the time goes on here. But we have had really good conditions, so hopefully that will continue. We have a number of speakers tonight, and I'm going to move the I'm going to move the speaker around a little bit. We've got somebody that needs to leave early, so we'll have Heath Von Eye, the Public Works Director, City Engineer, talk first about the responsibilities that the city has. Where did he go? Oh, okay, there you are. So you're on.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, everybody, for coming out this evening, particularly with everybody's busy schedules and all the other things going on in the world right now. We do appreciate you guys' attendance tonight and learning about our flood preparations. My component that I'll talk about briefly here this evening for your information pertains to the public's involvement in flood fighting as far as the city agency is concerned, and where our forces focus our efforts and why that is. And then we've got a few pictures of some of the work that we did last year and some of the efforts that we put into the flood fighting to help prevent the flood waters from affecting as many people and infrastructure as possible. Generally speaking, when you talk about any of the levels of government, one of their primary focuses is going to be the public infrastructure. It'll be the roads, the bridges, the sewer systems. In Watertown, we have two separate sewer systems. There's a storm sewer system where the rainwater and the surface water collects and goes underground and it ends up outfalling into a creek or a stream or the river. And then we also have the sanitary sewer system that collects all the wastewater from all of our buildings throughout town and is treated at the wastewater treatment plant. And a lot of times that's one of the general misconceptions that are out there is that those two types of water and flow end up at the same place and all get treated at the wastewater plant, when in fact they don't. And I just wanted to point that out because those two systems are kind of two of the primary ones that we look at protecting when it comes to floodwaters. Primarily the wastewater system, for several reasons. We don't want to surcharge the wastewater system in a flood event. And what that would mean is that the floodwaters are now entering into, either through the manholes or through basement drains or any other means they can access the sanitary sewer system. And then those pipes get inundated with stormwater, floodwater, and don't have the capacity any longer to carry the wastewater. And there's obviously bad things that can happen when that happens. A lot of properties end up getting backed up on with not just floodwater, but wastewater. And so that's one of the components when you see us building flood preventive measures like these HESCO baskets. That's what these are called, these green baskets that you see up here. They're filled with sand. If you're not familiar with that term, most of you in Watertown probably are, but those are called HESCO baskets. Really, they act as a temporary berm to help contain the floodwaters. And so last spring, you saw a lot of those go up in a quick hurry, thanks to the Corps of Engineers who came in and helped us expedite that process because of the imminent flooding that was coming quickly upon Watertown. The HESCO basket installation, like I mentioned, the Corps of Engineers helped coordinate this. These were strategically located along the river and to help keep those river flows channeled in the confines where they should be. There, as you've noticed, there's several levees and berms along the river that we've built over the years, but there's several gaps in there too that are not bermed. And so we have to fill those gaps with these HESCO baskets. The reason those gaps exist is mainly because a lot of those areas are in the floodway or the floodplain, and the city just hasn't gone through the rigorous process yet at this point to look at filling those gaps with permanent berms because we focused on other alternative measures that could help prevent flooding in the long term for the city. Those discussions continue to happen and continue to get looked at and analyzed as of recently, and something we'll continue to help focus on and try to determine long-term preventive measures to help protect the city from flooding. But I'll click through a few more of these pictures. These are just some of the installations and some of the sandbagging processes that occur. It's pretty systematic how these HESCO baskets get built and how they get filled with sand and how the sand gets compacted and things like that. You'll see this one. This is a good shot of the street closure that we performed. We held off on doing this as long as we could. Obviously, we didn't want to impact the traffic on these public streets. So we waited until, I think it was the day before, we thought the river, we had models that showed when the river was going to crest and the approximate elevation it might crest to. That's when we pulled the trigger on go ahead and closing these streets off with the HESCOs. Because if you notice, that's one of the gaps in that berm that I was mentioning. You have a berm on one side of the street, a berm on the other. We had to close that gap so that the water doesn't get out into the neighborhoods if it were preset elevation. This is just some of the sandbagging operations that were occurring. We had a great machine here at our use last year at our disposal from the Corps of Engineers. They brought that up for us. They coordinated the delivery of that. I can't remember if it was theirs or if it was the state's, but the Corps of Engineers helped us get this machine to help fill sandbags in a very quick manner. We were to fill a lot of sandbags. Most of these sandbags that we palleted and used, again, went towards protecting public infrastructure. We put them around our sanitary sewer lift stations. We used them to close the gaps in the HESCO baskets where the HESCO baskets were just too big and we couldn't get them closed. We had to use sandbags for that. Now, when all the public infrastructure was protected and we had leftovers, we did make those available to the general public to come and pick up, I believe at some point last spring. And the reason I say that is because I don't want to sound brash by saying that, but it is a secondary concern as far as the private protection of private property. The city would love to go out and help as many people as we could, but as you can imagine, when you're dealing with 22,000 residents, we can't hardly start to pick and choose whose house we're going to go out and start to help sandbag. So that's where the private responsibility does really fall on the homeowner or the business owner to protect their properties. Now, one of the functions we do help with in that respect is helping provide information. Yet, one of my roles as public works director is also the city engineer. And in the engineering office, we have a lot of technical data related to floodplain elevations and elevation certificates for properties that are in the floodplain. And that's some good valuable information that many folks can have at their disposal by simply contacting our engineering office and giving us your address and working with one of our engineers or urban planner who's our certified floodplain manager and help provide that kind of information to you. That's the end of the pictures that I had to share. So generally speaking, that's just one of the things we wanted to touch on. I know there were a lot of questions last year that came up. Why are we putting these big baskets everywhere? What are we doing? What are they protecting? Hopefully this discussion has helped shed a little bit of light on that and what the role of the public departments are, the city departments, when they're out there putting these measures into place. It's really to help protect that public infrastructure. It's helped to keep that river channel under control so it's not flooding the neighborhoods and the streets. Generally speaking, that's, again, at all levels of government, like the Corps of Engineers, for example, who spend a lot of money on this. They'll tell you the same thing, that they're out there really to help protect that public infrastructure and help try to mitigate any damages to that and prevent those damages from happening. So I'd love to help answer any questions related to this topic if anybody happens to have any. I would note too, I'll put a plug in for this for the wastewater superintendent. They deal with the variance, or the term escapes me, the sump pump variance, where we allow the sump pump flows to go into the sanitary sewer system. We kicked that off late last fall. We issued a record number of variances, which we're glad to see that people were complying with that process, actually getting a variance to be able to do that. And that's supposed to run conventionally through April 15th. If you recall last year, we had to go door to door to get people out of the sanitary sewer system, make their sump pump flows go outside to their yards, to the front curb, anywhere but the sanitary sewer system. We're thinking again this year, just because of the saturated conditions that we're under, that we're probably going to have to move that date up again. We haven't decided a definitive date yet, but over the next week or two here, we'll probably be announcing more on that to get those sump flows out of the sanitary sewer system.
Keith, question: the city and the utilities were working on a elevation map of the lake to where you could map a property at what level it would flood, and therefore go in and ensure that the in-ground stuff was plugged. Was that work completed, and are we ready to go that when the lake hits certain levels, we know which properties to attack and when?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our sister agency, the Watertown Municipal Utilities, collected a lot of data around the lake and made the actual survey shot, elevation shots on mainly their primary focus was the gas meters. They wanted to have elevations on those to know that they were protected and to know when they needed to be shut off in order to prevent the floodwaters from affecting that system. So we do have a lot of good elevation data, and they've compiled a spreadsheet and worked on compiling a map. I don't know the exact status of the map, but I do know we've got a good spreadsheet to use internally as far as utilities and public works, knowing which properties are at risk once the floodwaters get to a certain elevation. Again, that's steered more towards protecting that gas system, the natural gas system, and knowing when to shut those valves off to protect that infrastructure. We did want to use that data too, though, to help share with the general public, and I don't think it's quite ready to roll out as a map, but we do still have good information about elevations and things like that in our office, that if we were to get calls, we could definitely help fill those kind of questions. You know, what does the elevation certificate of a certain property say in relation to the floodplain elevations, and then as they monitor through this spring what the lake levels are going to do, that kind of helps them gauge what to expect for their own personal property and what kind of measures they might have to take. But no, that's a good question. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I also wanted to use an example from municipal utilities. Their substation, their power substation, they've got a big one right off the southwest corner of the Highway 212 bridge. And if you recall last year, that was HESCO basket all the way around that as well. That's another measure that they perform so that they can protect that electrical infrastructure as well. But something that we work closely with them on, and they've been heavily involved in our meetings here recently too, municipal utilities has. Any more questions I can help answer? Thank you. I turn it over to Assistant Police Chief Tim Toomey here.
All right, thanks, Heath. Well done. The moral of the story today is that we're in good shape, but that could change, and you're going to hear that throughout the whole presentation. I appreciate everybody coming. There's a lot going on in Watertown, not only the flood, but other things, and I want to let you know that Watertown is well prepared. If anybody doesn't know what the incident command structure is, Don Rowan from the fire department is going to come up a little later and tell you what that is, but it's an incredible thing when the city all comes together, and there's a lot of talents in the city, and it's amazing the work that they do when everybody works together, and Watertown is in good hands. My job when we activate the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, is I'm the Operations Section Chief. So operations is everything that goes on outside, So I kind of oversee with Keith Van Eye and who else is on there, I think, and Doug Cran is Steve from Utilities. But we all take turns overseeing the Operations Center. So last year, it was about late March is when we started really watching the melt and paying close attention. We were working closely with the National Weather Service and the Army Corps of Engineers, and we were ready. And on a drop of a dime, we activated that EOC, and it's just an incredible thing to see all those people come together and just click. There's no egos in the room. It's all for one good cause, and everybody's working together. But he's going to tell you more about the ICS structure, and then you're going to hear from the National Weather Service as well as some other people. Part of operations is we have a drone with the police department. And so we're able to get footage that we never were able to get before. And it really is a game changer. And this is a good demonstrative evidence of the shape we were in last year compared to where we're going to be this year. So I'm just going to take through this first slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Go back one. This first slide is a side-by-side. Same footage, it's close to the same footage, but it's going to play at the same time. And as you can see, the one on the left is from March 28th. That's when we had a lot of good thaw, and we were experiencing a lot of problems with it going over the roadway. And this was last Sunday. So you can see the difference in the water. So this is the way we want to be. This is looking good. And it'll play for a little while, and we'll skip through them, but...
Way out the fence.
Pardon?
Way out the fence.
Over here?
Both sides.
Yeah, so you can see how far away the water is here along this farmyard. It's incredible. That's a lot of water flowing. And you got to remember, that's all flowing water, so it's going south. But here's the bridge this year compared to the bridge last year. That's at 14th Avenue North. I do want to give credit to Sergeant Nick Howman. He's our pilot. He's our only certified pilot. It has to be a law enforcement certification to fly this. He does a great job. He comes out on a drop of the dime. He's actually Facebook Living this to anybody that couldn't make it. So when it comes to technology, Nick's young. He knows all that stuff. It's like playing a video game, right, Nick? So we'll skip through this, but you can see, look at the difference. I mean, that's just amazing. Thankfully to the thaw that we're having. But again, it could change. One good rain event or snow event could make it all change because the ground is still saturated. But we'll skip ahead. This is 10th Avenue North. You'll see this one, we're heading north right now. We're flying north. We're actually going to turn around and come back south, and then when it catches up to the same area, it will start playing so you can see this side-by-side comparison. But as you can imagine, this is invaluable information for the planners at the Emergency Operations Center. We can actually bring this into the building and show them exactly what we're looking at. This is Town and Country Trailer Court, just for orientation.
And I'd add to the 10th Avenue Bridge is actually the first bridge, or the 10th Avenue roadway is actually the first one that actually goes over for water. That's kind of the one we kind of gauge. We kind of watch the Broadway gauging station, and we know if that hits around that 11 feet mark, we know that the 10th Avenue is going to go under. So we watch that one. That's our first one. We'll put road blockages on that one, and we'll follow through with 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue respectively.
So the professionals all know the triggers. There's different gauges around Watertown that they know when we're going to be in trouble and when we need to activate and go into action and start setting up all those HESCO baskets and sandbags. This is even now, currently today, this is a lot more thawed. I think the river's flowing pretty good right now. So that's 10th Avenue North. And then we'll just show some still pictures. This is the 3rd Avenue North last year. That's incredible. This is the Lions Park. Is that Lions Park? Right there? Yeah. And this is what it looks like today. So here's Lions Park here. So it didn't become part of the river this year. And if anybody is playing the little game with the lion out there on Lions Park, it still hasn't melted, so you haven't won yet. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Okay, good. Here's the 3rd Avenue and Kemp Avenue bridges. Incredible difference. We're in great shape. You can actually see the water is incredible over here. This is the 4th Avenue Bridge over by Iron and Metal. Again, that water is just everywhere and it's staying right in its banks right now. And then Highway 212, just some still shots there. We have a nice brand new bridge there now, so hopefully that's going to help flow some of that water more than it did last year. And then this is the inlet on Highway 20 for Lake Campesca. The videos aren't synced up as well as the other ones, but you'll be able to see the difference in the water coming in for each year. Does anybody know these people? It's a tough one right there. But if you pay attention up here, all this dry land. I think Roger's going to talk a little bit more about the lake and where we're at today. So we won't spend too much time on that. And then we went out to the Meadow Lake area, which is south of Walmart on 29th Street.
Who's that guy pointing?
That was me, being silly. But that's an incredible amount of water over there. Compared to this year, the river's still in its banks. And we learned a valuable lesson when we were out there, and I'll fast forward because I know you guys have stuff to do, but I thought I could fast forward. Oops. I was able to do it on another screen, but. Well, we can let it play out, I guess, because you have to see it. It's pretty cool. That's weird. What was I supposed to do?
Want to let you click on the picture and bring the ball up?
Nope.
Is that the last one, Tim? Hit escape and deny your presentation.
Okay. All right, let me just go right to the slide. There we go. So as we were flying over there, we did notice that there's a bunch of geese doing what geese do. And we were hoping that we weren't going to bother them at all. But as we were leaving, the geese got a little spooked and started flying away.
This is a very expensive drone.
Yeah, it's a $5,000 piece of equipment. Oh, that didn't work.
You could probably just put on this slide.
Keep going.
But slide from this slideshow.
Can you see the geese?
Yeah, that one in the top left corner.
Okay. It's like, oh no. So there was maybe some cuss words said at that moment as they're like, how am I going to explain that to the chief? So that's it for the slideshow. I mean, I think that's a good way to visualize to see how good a shape we are in this year. And but keep your fingers crossed and keep saying those prayers because we're one rainstorm away from being in trouble. So thank you.
Well, everybody, my name is Don Brolin. I'm the Assistant Fire Chief at Watertown Fire Rescue. I've got quite a few years there at the department. And my job up here in the flood organizational chart structure is I'm the planning section chief. What the planning section chief does, it's his job to create all the documents for the specific flood. And why is that important? Well, that's important because of FEMA reimbursement if there's a declaration for FEMA. We have our Department of Public Safety here, Randy Maddox here, he's part of that team. If there is a declaration, our Emergency Management Director, Jamie Torstensen, would put that stuff together. And once the governor declares that, without these forms that we put in place, they're called the incident action forms, basically we would not be able to get reimbursement. So just a little bit about the top up here. We have the incident commander up on top. And what the incident commander actually does, that person is totally responsible for the overall management of the scene. The current individuals up there right now are our sheriff, Brad Hall, our police chief, Lee McPeak, and our fire chief, Doug Kranz. And these individuals will set the objectives, will create strategies and tactics as a team, command team, and a planning process throughout the day. What we do is we actually have operational period briefing meetings in the morning and in the evening. Why we do that is we determine what the objectives are going to be for that specific day. There's a lot of individuals that work in the operations section, and so essentially we have to find out what are some of these things that need to be accomplished throughout the day. And we'll have one operational period could be 12 hours, one operational period could be actually 8 hours. So in a nutshell, we have these team members identifying these particular roles. So the incident commander, he's basically in charge of the overall incident. Now on to the next group up there. It's called the command staff. There are public information officer, liaison officer, and safety officer. As you can see, we have the mayor as our liaison officer. She's kind of charged with, and so is Brenda Hanton. They're kind of charged with identifying procurement processes within state type management. You know, basically at the state duty officer level, they'll basically consult with the governor and possibly other liaison folks that would be able to get us any type of logistical resources that are needed for our specific area that we can't get through the logistics office. Now we look at the public information officer, very important role. Nick Amman is right here now doing the Facebook videoing for us right now, but he's tasked with disseminating the information to the public. And that information is then fed through emails to the local radio stations, newspaper, probably even TV stations as well. And what we do is give out that information that's needed throughout the specific day during these floods. Now they also will set up the press briefings with those local folks as well and give out that specific information as needed. The safety officer, very important role up there. We have 3 individuals, Rick Hartley, Chuck Remus, and Kirk Ellis. Their job is very specific. We have a lot of operations people, boots on the ground, that are working. Their job is to go out and visualize, watch, and see if things are being done at a very safe manner. So the command staff up there is very, very important for us. Okay, over here we have the operations section chief. Pete Bonai, our public works director, does a fantastic job. Great vision and very dynamic leader, as well as Tim. He just got done doing a nice presentation as far as the drone, and Steve Winter from the utilities department. Obviously, the ops section is 95% of all our work that gets done, and those individuals have a lot of people that are working underneath them, and I'll show you that in the next slide. Logistics section, we have 3 individuals there. They're in charge and they're tasked with getting all of us the information, or all the tools and resources that we need throughout the event. That's a pretty busy area as well. And again, planning section, you're in charge of all the documentation, resource unit, situation unit. They identify any of the plans that need to be put forth so we can put that incident action plan together. And obviously we need a finance section, obviously, to pay for all the wonderful bills that are going to be happening. Now, briefly up here, I'm not going to spend too much time up here, but we have a law enforcement branch, emergency medical service branch, street highway. We have a utilities branch, we have a volunteer group, and then obviously we have the last group up there. But these individuals up here are tasked with many different jobs throughout the day as far as the operations. 95% of all the work is being done with these folks here throughout that mitigation process, from sandbagging unit, getting those volunteers in order to get those objectives completed throughout the day. And essentially, there's probably, in any one given day, probably 75 to 80 people that are working throughout this incident on a daily fashion. And hopefully we don't have that this year, right, Mary? Last but not least, this is the planning section. Resource unit, we work closely with the National Weather Service. Obviously, she's going to be doing the presentation here, Kelly. and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They provide a lot of resources for us. Obviously, we need that as we continue to plan throughout the week. I believe last year our Emergency Operations Center was activated and was open for 8 or 9 days, Mayor? Something like that, 8 or 9 days. And then the Situation Unit is responsible for helping with providing, geospatial data, drone footage, a lot of pictures that will help us throughout the process of that particular incident. Any questions? Well, that's probably the more boring part of the presentation, but it obviously gets you to the situation of how we put our judicial chart together.
All right, I am Kelly Sarah. I'm the Warning Coordination Meteorologist out of the National Weather Service in Aberdeen. We work very closely with the River Forecast Center out of Kansas City when it comes to issuing both warnings on the weather side and warnings on the flood-related side as well. So I'll just take you through some of that right now. We are super lucky. The last 28 days, we have not had more than a trace of precipitation. So that has been our friend. We've also had this really awesome temperature cycle where we go above freezing during the day and then we drop below at night, and it's been about as perfect of a snowmelt as you can ask for. So this map right here just shows for the last 30 days where we've been in terms of precipitation, and we've been below normal, which is what we want to see during spring flood season. And temperatures have been near or just below normal as well. Soil moisture remains very high, and this has been a concern of ours since the very beginning. Going into the fall, we were very wet, very saturated, and that has just continued all through the winter, and we don't have the ability for the soils to soak up much moisture. Our sponge is already wet and is not going to be able to soak up much more. Now the good news is, in the last month or so, we have seen a slight improvement. We're going in the right direction, but we've got a long ways to go before that soil is going to really be able to take on a lot of moisture. Now, we are seeing the soils warming as well. The top 4 inches, they're right around that freezing mark or so, so we're about to see that thaw start. So if there is any capacity for the ground to take in water, we should be seeing it quite soon. Current stream flows across the region, across Cottington County, are below flood stage, which is really good at this time. We also have, again, as I mentioned, the snowmelt has been about perfect. There's only just a small amount of snow left in and around the Watertown area, but we're looking at just tiny patches of less than, most of it's gone, and a few spots of less than 4 inches across the region. And then this is showing the amount of liquid in that snow, and same thing there, probably about very, very spotty 2 inches or less. So there's not a whole lot of water, although I should preface that as there is some standing water in fields that has frozen, so that's going to have to kind of come into the system as well. But for the most part, we've had about a perfect snow melt. So that's the good news. The maybe potentially not as good of news is, while our forecast through the next week is really good, we don't have a lot of precipitation, at least into the weekend, it does look like we are going to flip more into a cooler, wetter pattern beginning Sunday and continuing through next week. So the 7-day forecast, most of the precipitation is going to stay south, and there is a system that tracks across North Dakota, so we're kind of missing it. In the next 7 days, we have basically less than a quarter inch of precipitation in the forecast. However, as we go up further, again, we're seeing this more active pattern, more systems moving across the area, and that brings in the potential for us to receive additional precipitation in the next coming weeks. So this is the 6 to 10 day outlook. We have below normal temperatures and above normal precipitation forecast for the next 6 to 10 days. And that also extends into the next 8 to 14 days where it's below normal precipitation, or below normal temperatures, excuse me, and above normal precipitation. If you go out to the 1 month as a whole, temperatures are above normal, and then precipitation, we don't have any strong signals one way or the other. So how does that play out into the river forecasts? These are just our short-term forecasts right now. There are no gauging locations where we produce forecasts that are expected to go above flood stage in the near term. However, the potential still exists for minor to moderate flooding on the Big Sioux River. And so while the snowmelt has gone well, we are transitioning to more of a wet pattern, and we don't want to let our guard down quite yet because one system could change the flood situation very, very quickly. That is what I had. Are there any questions for me?
Thank you, Kelly. Well, I'm Roger Foote. I'm the project coordinator for the Upper Big Sioux River Watershed Project. And it's kind of my fault that everybody's here tonight. I really appreciate the various agencies and speakers coming out to help disseminate this information to the Watertown residents. I know we don't have a packed house tonight, but it is going on GovTV and Facebook Live as well, so I really appreciate everybody coming to this evening. My concerns with the Watershed Project is mostly around the lake, Lake Nipesca. Lots of information about the lake itself. We can go into that deeply. However, what I would like to kind of get some highlights here. The first thing I would like you to do is take a picture of this slide. If we get into a flood situation this year, next year, these numbers are the digits for Lake Nipesca, Lake Pelican, full elevations, ordinary high water mark, base flood elevation. All these numbers have been converted over to the 88 datum, which we've gotten everybody together and we're using one set of numbers. This is very important. So these numbers will match your flood insurance numbers on your house. I hope. If not, I know this wonderful person in City Hall named Brandy. She can more than take care of any questions that you have. Lake issues, surface water, groundwater, wind and waves. It's not just a flood event that causes problems with your shoreline. Those of you who live at the lake really understand this. If the water levels are high, and when the wind blows, we can have, I think I've seen upwards of a 4-foot wave crash into the shorelines or more. Floating debris, we never encourage someone to use wood as a shoreline protection device because when it fails, it becomes a battering ram for your neighbors. We had some issues with that last year, docks coming apart because the water was really high. We get a windstorm, the waves tear things apart, and then use that to batter the neighbors. Your home's elevation, talk about that on the next slide, and individual home protection. That same wonderful person from City Hall, she wishes to remain anonymous, but her name is Brandy. She came up with directions. This is another slide to take a picture of. If you go to the First District website and follow these directions, I'll post this on our Facebook page as well. This will take you through to a map of your property where you can turn on the contour lines and actually see what the elevations are at your property. And then when we say that, okay, we're getting close to 1723, you can look at those contour lines that are labeled and have an idea of how close it's getting to your property. And if you follow all of these directions, you should end up with maps similar to this. Now you can zoom in closer in this map and zoom right in on your property, get a really good look. The green lines are contour lines, they're in 2-foot intervals. I stayed back a little bit just to keep landowner names off of it. But I think to the upper side of the channel there it says 1723, other side is 1724. So those numbers directly relate to the lake elevations that we will report, and we do report year-round. Now back to the lake. One of the things, we'll go to this one first and then come back. A lot of the damage that happens around the lake during a high water event looks just like this. This is basically a function of a lawn grass that does not have a very deep root system. And when the water rises, it will actually float the sod and then strip out the sands and materials from underneath it. I do have some handouts here today that talks about deeper rooted plants that when you go to reseed this, use like a tall fescue or some of the native grasses with deep root systems that will actually go down through the sod, through the topsoil, and actually into the base layer and helps tie all that together and it stops a lot of this type of erosion from happening. Let me hop back. Those of you with protection already, this is normal. This is what happens when you have a high water event. You get waves crashing, the ice moves. I don't care how big a rock is, the ice will move it. But a part of the program is that the landowner's responsibility is to gather up all the grandkids and all their friends and neighbors, have a barbecue, go out in the water and throw those rocks back. You've got to cover up that, you can see the black fabric underneath. That is what really holds the system together. That is an 80-pound punctured geotextile that allows the water to pass through, that stops the soil particles from being stripped away. The rocks, their purpose is to hold that fabric down and not get washed away, and also to block the sunlight from hitting it. We've inspected some systems like this that were put in right after 1997 that are still functioning correctly today. Here's another system that we see. People really don't realize that the smaller rocks can get sucked out easily. The fabric is there, and that's holding a lot of the shoreline in place, but the rocks aren't big enough. We like them to be a 12-inch up to a 24-inch rock, and then just fill in with the little ones. Because the waves suck those out, now they've got to go out and dig those out of the lake and throw them back up on there. This is what it should look like. This is placed at a 3-to-1 slope where when the waves crash in, there's enough length for the energy of the wave to be dissipated before it gets to the top, and everything can wash back down with the fabric underneath to hold the soil in place. One of our concerns during the last season, the water levels were so high, and then once they started getting down where you could actually do some work at the top, the growing season was over, and it would have been impossible to get any kind of grass reestablished in there before it grows. So that's the danger zone on this one if it was the springtime, for water to crash up over and actually suck that black dirt back off again before the grass gets established. So that's kind of what we're looking for with the shoreline protection. Lake and Pesca Water Project District has graciously encouraged me to offer cost share to landowners around the lake. It will be on a case-by-case basis. I'll have to come out and do an inspection to see what it looks like. If this is all your problem is, you're probably not going to get any kind of cost share. But if it's really ripped up and it's causing a major erosion problem, then we can help you fix it. If it's just landscaping, we're not allowed to do that. Now, this is where we get to go into the weeds just a little bit. Innovative home protection. Do a search on the internet. Look for residential flood barriers. There's a lot of products out there. I cannot vouch for any of them. There may be some interesting stuff out there. We have had people around the lake build temporary berms, build permanent berms around their homes. We've had people lift their homes with various degrees of expense. Do some research and see what you can find. The blue tubes down at the bottom, You inflate those with water. There are a couple of those around the lake that have been used. Good points is that they work well. Bad points is that it's pretty much a one-time use because it's nearly impossible to drain them out completely and save them. The door barrier, some homes have a decent foundation. If you have a basement, that probably wouldn't work, the water would go down. But then there's some other creativity. Some people have plastic wrapped the entire floor of their home. I'm not sure how that will work without a decent anchor. Yeah. Buyer beware. But the most interesting thing I found was the car bag. You can see the orange bag there. This picture came from Taiwan. What it is you buy a bag, you roll your car into it, you strap it tight. They actually have foam bumpers that you put around your car. And they have you can see the leashes there. That's to tie off to the tree so that it doesn't float away in the flooding event. If anybody tries that, please let me know. I want to watch. And then the simple thing, the driveway or the garage door bumper on the inside, those I think I've seen available on the internet. That's 2 inches of protection. If you're that close and you need that, that is something that you could consider. So the moral of the story is, if you're super concerned, do your research, find out the pros, find out the cons. Beware of people selling snake oil, of course, and use a little bit of common sense. Other areas around the lake and away from the lake, make sure that your sump pumps are ready to go. I know a lot of them pump all winter anyway. The variants that Pete was talking about a little bit, there is a link to that on the city website, I believe, that you can, if you have the variants, you should know about it. Groundwater is always an issue. Kelly was alluding to the groundwater is saturated. This feeds into our aquifer. This whole city sits on top of a portion or another of this shallow water aquifer. You wouldn't think that the hospital at the top of St. Anne's Hill would have any issues with water, but they do. They're at the top of the hill. There's a clay bank that runs along that side of the Big Sioux River that holds water up. There's lots of sands and gravels, and it's all water bearing throughout the entire area in places where you'd be amazed. Just a funny story. We were looking for a water source for the zoo to help fill the duck ponds. We drilled 36 feet deep just in the disc golf course area and hit nothing but solid clay all the way down. We couldn't find water. And we were, I think, 50 feet from the river, 100. But on the other side, the sump pumps were running complete all the time. And last that I have for you is this, stay informed. You can take a picture of this one as well. These are some of the locations where you will find flood information as we update it, places where you can ask questions, leave comments. If you're concerned there isn't anybody on the team that will not answer a question, we do like to go through channels during the event for our public information officer. But leading up to that, feel free to contact any of us almost at any time. And with that, I thank you very much. And I will hand it over to Mark. I wasn't sure which. All right. And Mark can take it from here.
Do you have my slides?
Yes.
Good evening. My name is Mark Macy. I'm with the South Dakota Office of Emergency Management out of Pierce, South Dakota. With me this evening, actually I have two representative FEMA specialists out of the Joint Field Office located in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I have Mr. Eldon Miller. He is the Floodplain Management Task Force leader for FEMA in this area. And then also have his assistant, Kelly Taylor, who is an insurance specialist. And this evening, we're just going to talk briefly on flood insurance. So tonight, we're going to cover flood insurance. We're going to be here to ask, around for any questions, things of that nature. We'll go into a little bit on flood risk in the claims process. Then also just have a slide on the whole resource request process if communities are looking at putting resources into the state. So flood insurance. Now, I have a homeowner's policy already. Does that cover flood damage? Well, the answer to that question is no. If you have surface water damage, your homeowner's policy is not going to cover that. You actually need a separate flood insurance policy. And flood insurance is actually available through both the National Flood Insurance Program, that's what the state and FEMA deal with, or actually the private market as well. So I think our best recommendation for this is talk to your insurance agent. Some things that we've noticed from the state side, that different agencies, your rate might be a little bit different. So check with a couple different agencies, see what that rate might be, and check both the NFIP side and potentially the private market side. More claims these days are actually coming out of low to moderate risk areas, areas not even identified as a floodplain. So the big thing, just know your risk. Know your risk. And over in South Dakota in 2019, is the wettest year on record. There's over 15 million in National Flood Insurance Program payouts to residents here in South Dakota. So flood insurance just isn't for like coastal communities. 1 inch of water in a home can cause up to $25,000 worth of damage. So maybe potentially a $400 or $500 a year flood insurance policy is not wasting much money. We've kind of seen this past year some policies, people were paying $400 or $500 and actually had some insurance payouts of over $150,000 for damage. So it definitely can help. It definitely can help out. But FEMA will not always be able to help through a disaster declaration. In 2019, South Dakota actually had 4 disaster declarations. Most of those were flooding related. But the state of South Dakota has put in for disaster declarations before. Just a couple years ago, there was the Lake Hiddenwood Dam blowout, the Walworth, Edmonds, McPherson County area, had a heavy rain event, a 10-inch storm. It was a big event for that area, but it wasn't a big enough event to be declared, a federal presidential disaster declaration, so assistance wasn't available. And then with these past years, we've kind of seen on the disaster declaration side, if you don't have an insurance policy, the FEMA individual assistance payouts will be close to just around about $5,000. So it's money to help and all that, but it's not enough money, to officially get you kind of back onto your feet. Go back a slide here. This slide here, it's a FEMA statistical slide, but just about, a little bit about the NFIP, what's called the penetration rate. In South Dakota, there's about 27,000 structures located inside the special flood hazard area, and that's the 100-year floodplain. And there's about 1,881 policies located inside of the special flood hazard area. So you divide it, you take that 1,881 divided by 26,490, and you get a penetration rate of about 7.1. But as you can see, city of Watertown has a much higher penetration rate. About structures located in the special flood hazard area, 1,571. But the total policies in the special flood hazard is about 378. So we have a penetration rate of around 24–25%. So just for your information. Going to this next slide, if you do have damages and you have a flood insurance policy, main things about the claims process, take some photographs. Definitely make an inventory of your damaged contents, your damaged goods. Keep serial numbers of any possibly damaged equipment and appliances, things of that nature. Report your claim, start your proof of loss process. If you're looking at rebuilding, make some changes, getting back on your feet, definitely go in and talk to your city or county and get a permit. Then also, potentially mitigate if you can. There may be money to help. And if you have a flood insurance policy, a lot of times there's potentially up to an additional $30,000 that you can get on top of your damage payout to help, potentially mitigate and bring the structure up so there's less chance of it flooding in the future. Well, if you do have a claim, you put this in and you get a denial letter, that just isn't the end of the line. So if you disagree with the findings, you can actually file an appeal. But to file an appeal, you must, 1, explain the issues in writing. You need to include a copy of that denial letter, and then provide some kind of supporting documentation, maybe some photos of the flood damage, some evidence, some things of that nature that, kind of, contradict the denial letter, things of that nature. There's no fee to file an appeal, and you don't need a third party to represent you, but if you do have a third party to represent you, FEMA will not pay any of the costs, associated with that representation. And the big thing is you have 60 days for when you receive that denial letter to try to file an appeal with that. And then you send appeals to that location below. Now, resource requests. City of Watertown, other communities in Connington County, Hamilton County, things of that nature. You can coordinate with the city. We can kind of give you updates where resources come. But when the resource actually gets officially submitted and sent into the system, that needs to go through the county emergency manager. So in this case, Jamie, or if it's Hamilton County, it's Dave Schaefer, things of that nature. Not every city has a contact into the system, so that's why it's kind of broke down to this county level. 66 counties in the state, there's just 66, county people that can kind of play and get their fingers in. And so that's the big thing. Cities, towns need to coordinate through the county emergency manager. And then the next big thing is check surrounding communities for mutual aid prior to making your request. See if those, see if that possible, that resource is available close by rather than making a request and having to pay, a larger sum of money to order something in. With that, myself and the FEMA gentleman that I introduced a little earlier are going to stick around here. We'll be available for any, questions, things of that nature. And if you have any specific things that we can answer, we'll definitely take your questions and get those into the hands of the right people to answer them. All right. Thank you, Roger.
Anybody have any questions? Unfortunately, because we have experience with flooding, we're pretty good at it. And every year that we do it, we get a little bit better. And that drone footage, that's something new. That really helped us a lot last time. And now we've got the new modeling, so as time goes on, we get better and better at it. But Roger, did you have anything else to add?
Unless anyone has any questions that we can help answer with, we'll throw it open to anyone that's interested. Anything coming in on Facebook Live? Pretty quiet tonight, I apologize for that.
All right, well, thank you all for coming, and you can always contact us at City Hall if you have any more questions. Thanks for coming.